My name is John Light. I wear a lot of hats in the Aragon project. One of them is AGP editor and governance facilitator. So I'm going to be speaking from that perspective here. So for some background, the Aragon network is the DAO that oversees the Aragon project, and this is the DAO that we're talking about governing. The Aragon network is mostly funded by the proceeds of the Aragon network token sale that was held in 2017. And but before ANT holders could actually govern the network, we needed the tools to do so. And so we built the Aragon client, which you can find at app.aragon.org, which enables people to create and manage DAOs. We have two foundational documents for Aragon governance. One is the Aragon Manifesto, which was ratified by ANT holders in June of 2018. And the other is AGP1, which is the Aragon governance proposal process, which was ratified in November 2018. There are 4 main tracks of different types of proposals that people can create under the AGP1 process. And those are the association proposals, the finance proposals, the meta proposals, which are proposals to modify either the AGP process or the manifesto, and proclamations, which are basically just like collective statements made by the Aragon network. And here's a quick overview of like how the AGP process works. There are 3 initial stages where a proposal goes from like idea to discussion to draft, and then there's once the proposal is finalized, it goes into a review by the Aragon Association, which is the nonprofit steward of the Aragon project, and then proposals that are approved by the association go to a final vote by the Aragon network. And the reason for that middle step with the association review is to prevent any like potentially malicious proposals or like off-topic proposals, or generally proposals that would not be in the best interest of the Aragon network at this time from getting onto the final ballot. In the future, we hope to replace that, or plan to replace that step with having the Aragon court as the as a dispute resolution mechanism rather than relying on the Aragon Association. And then finally, there's the Aragon network vote, where ANT holders will actually vote to approve or reject proposals. So I'm going to give a quick recap of AGPs by the numbers. There have been 3 votes so far this year under the AGP process. 33 proposals were submitted on time. 26 proposals made it to the final ballot, and 21 proposals were approved by ANT holders, for a total of about 8.5 million DAI and 3.5 million ANT deployed. DAI is kind of the main unit of account that we use for funding operational expenses, and then we use ANT grants to incentivize long-term commitment and participation in the Aragon network. Some more numbers that might be of interest. Average participation rate in terms of percentage of the total ANT supply voting is about 4.75%. And the highest participation rate was 7.84%. And that was actually just for a meta proposal to modify the Aragon governance process. The top 3 most contentious proposals, which I'm defining as proposals that are closest in agree and disagree, are AGP 19. Was perhaps the most contentious proposal that we had so far. This was the first flock funding proposal submitted by Autark to become a full-time team working on Aragon. 54% yes, 46% no. AGP 16, which was a proposal to extend the vote duration, 44% yes and 66 no. and AGP 37, which was a retainer for an ongoing Aragon network security partner. 35% yes, 65% no. So it's not just complete, agreement across the board. There have been some relatively contentious proposals where it came down pretty close. And perhaps a bonus, number 4, is a proposal that got a lot of attention earlier this year, which was AGP 42, which was a proposal to basically ban the Aragon network from funding any development work on any chain except Ethereum. That one got 33% yes, or 30% yes, 70% no, or 31% yes and 69% no. So that it was really exciting to watch these proposals go down, and I'm sure the authors feel the same way. So some lessons that were learned, just some of my takeaways. These weren't all the lessons, but these are some of the highlights. So the first important thing is to set up a direct communication channel with voters to cut through the noise. We have a lot of stuff going on at the Aragon project. Even if you're following our Twitter, our announcements on Aragon Chat, our mailing list, all of the channels, it can get overwhelming just trying to follow all of the things that are going on. So if you're just interested in participating in governance, we actually have an Aragon Network Votes mailing list that will just send you 3 or 4 emails per quarter, just letting you know, here's the proposals that are being voted on, here's the time to vote, the vote is starting now, go vote. And that's been really helpful. That mailing list has a really great, a really high click-through rate. Put authoritative information about a vote in one place and repeatedly tell people where they can go to that one place to find the information. For the first vote, our main source of truth was the blog, but again, our blog has a lot of different posts going through it. You don't want to be, sifting through all these posts to find the one that has the information about the vote. So we created a page on the Aragon Wiki that tells people, exactly when the next vote is, what are the proposals that are being considered, if there are any changes that we have to make because maybe the Ethereum network is forking and we can't vote at that time, which happened in January. And so we constantly point people to that page. If you want to know what the authoritative source of truth on an upcoming vote, go to that page in the wiki. It's the governance page in the wiki. Keep the process as simple as possible to lower the barrier to participation and reduce the likelihood of the mistakes. This is generally good advice for any sort of product or process that you're developing, but it's especially important in governance. Like in government voting, they send you a ballot, you check the boxes, you mail it in, or take it down to the library or whatever. It's very simple. Same kind of thing with on-chain governance. You want to keep the process for voting very simple, as low friction as possible, and make it very easy for people to understand so that it doesn't take a lot of mental effort to participate. And finally, ask participants for feedback and use it to make the process better. After each of the votes, we send out a survey to the Aragon community. Whether you voted or not, we want to hear from you about what your feedback is about participating in the vote. And we have actually used that feedback to directly make improvements to the process. And so we really value that feedback. Some open questions that we have. How do we increase the participation rate while maintaining or improving decision quality? Right now, there's a proposal that's being discussed to actually pay voters to show up and vote. The idea being that it takes time and effort to vote, and so you should compensate people for doing that. But it might not be that straightforward. It might introduce other weird incentives. If you pay people to vote, that might not necessarily make the governance process better. And so, this is an open question. We would love your input if you have thoughts on that. How do you protect against various kinds of attacks like collusion, vote selling, bad voting, which is, I'm calling a bad voting attack, where somebody buys a bunch of tokens, votes the wrong way, like they reject good proposals and they approve bad ones. and then they short the A&T token to make money off of those bad decisions. How do we prevent these kinds of attacks on the governance system when anyone can participate in a pseudonymous way on a global network? These are interesting questions to solve. And then how do we run meaningful experiments while protecting the integrity of the Aragon network? Things like paying voters. It seems straightforward. You pay voters, but what if that has a detrimental effect on the Aragon network governance process and we screw up a vote? Well, we have votes once per quarter. We can't fix it until 3 months later. And if the vote has lasting effects, it might be an irreversible mistake. So how do we run meaningful experiments with skin in the game without actually putting the Aragon governance process at risk? And finally, how do we continually improve vote communications and UX? This is something that we're constantly working on. The feedback that we get through the surveys has helped a lot in identifying points of friction and confusion. But this is something we're constantly thinking about. How do we get in touch with those 20,000 plus A&T holders and get them to participate? So that's what I have today as a recap of the Aragon network governance process so far, and I would love to hear any questions that you have for me today. Thank you.
Well, actually, you asked all my questions in the open questions already yourself, so that's perfect. But the one that interests me most, I guess, is like you say, for incentivization of voters, because indeed, like you have about 7.8 turn up of voters. Like, yeah, could you tell a little bit more, like what thoughts you already had on it? Because it's indeed a tricky one.
Yeah. So my personal opinion about this is that participation is only important to me insofar as a higher participation rate raises the barrier to attacking the system. Somebody buying a bunch of A&T on the market and then voting poorly intentionally to try to say lower the value of A&T, or maybe they're in a competing project and they want to make Aragon look bad. I mean, there's a number of different motivations, but so the higher the participation rate, the more expensive an attack. Other than that, participation is not the metric that I look at as a measure of success for Aragon governance. For me, the measure of success is how good are the decisions that are being made by the network. And so if we can make great decisions with a low participation rate, that's a good thing in my opinion, because there's less costs involved with a lower participation rate. There are fewer people involved, there are fewer tokens at stake, so on and so forth. So I think there's a sweet spot to find where we make attacks expensive enough that they're not worth trying to do, but we also aren't bringing all of the A&T holders into the conversation and to make these decisions. But yeah, it's an ongoing process of learning and experimentation to find out what works best. One more question.
All right.
Sorry, like, that's the whole idea, like,
totally cool.
All right, we'll take it offline.
All right.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much again.
Thank you.